it's time to make a new InDesign document. The way to make a new InDesign document is go to the File menu, and from the New submenu, choose Document. Or on the Mac, press Command-N, or on Windows, press Control-N. But instead of making a document from here, I'm going to show you a little trick. You can create a new document from a template. When you choose Document from Template, it launches Adobe Bridge, which is Adobe's asset management program, and it takes you right to a bunch of templates that actually ship with InDesign. Very few InDesign users ever look at this, but there's some really good templates in here. For example, I'll scroll down and double-click on the Reports folder. That shows me all of the various reports, like an annual report that was designed by a designer that I could use. I'll click on Annual Report 1, and you'll see a preview of it over here. The cool thing is I can actually scroll through the pages of my template to see if this is the kind of template I want to work with, even before opening it in InDesign. This looks pretty good, so I'm going to double-click on it to open it in InDesign. Templates are great when you're first starting out with InDesign because you can change the pictures, change the layout, change the text, make it yours very easily, and still come out with something really quite good. Also, it's a wonderful way to deconstruct how somebody makes a good InDesign document. Okay, go ahead and put this away and create a brand new document from scratch to see how that's done. I'll choose Close from the File menu to close that, and create a new document from scratch. What we see is the New Document dialog box. Now, the New Document dialog box gives me a lot of control over how the new document is going to be created, the size, the number of columns, and so on, but it's important not to get too hung up on this right now because we can always go back and change any of these things later. First, you should set your page size to your document size, not the size of the paper you're printing on, but the actual size of the document you're trying to create. For example, if you're trying to make something that's 4 by 4 inches, go ahead and change the width to 4 inches by 4 inches. Note that I can type in any measurement system I want here. I typed in 4 inches, and InDesign automatically converted it to 24 picas because that was my default measurement for InDesign right now. If your document is going to have 3 columns of text, go ahead and set the number of columns right here in the number field. And also, you can change the gutter between those columns here. I'll put in 1 pica 6 to give a little bit of extra room between each of those columns. Now in the margins, you want to set the area that's going to be the live area of your document, where you're going to be putting most of your text and graphics. Let's say you want this larger, maybe 1 inch on the top. No problem, you see it converts it automatically. Now you'll notice that as soon as I hit the Tab key to move from this field to the next, it set all of those to 1 inch or 6 picas. And that's because of this little lock icon. When the lock icon is turned on, all of the margins are going to be the same. If I want different margins on different sides, I turn off the lock margin, then I can set it to anything I want. Maybe I only want 3 picas down here. Now let's look at the top of the dialog box. The number of pages is however many pages you want to start off with. If you know you're going to be creating a 10-page document, go ahead and type 10 in here. Honestly, I usually just start with 1 and add pages later, but it's up to you. You want to turn on facing pages when you're working on something like a book or a magazine, when there's an obvious left and right-hand page. And the master text frame option has to do with whether or not InDesign is going to place a text frame on your master pages for you automatically. In fact, if you're a QuarkXPress user, this is exactly the same thing as QuarkXPress's automatic text box feature. We'll go much more into all these options later when we start talking about the details of columns and margins and so on. Now, InDesign also gives you more features in this dialog box than you can see at first. Click on More Options, and you can see Bleed and Slug options as well. The Bleed and Slug guides add guides outside the printable area of the page, so that if you're bleeding an object off the side of the page, you can snap right to a guide. The slug area is helpful when you're doing things like adding extra contact information outside of the printable area that you want to show up in print, but you want it to get trimmed off before the final product is delivered. Now the cool thing about the New Document dialog box is once you've done all the work setting this up, you can save all of this with a preset. All you do is click Save Preset, give it a name. I'll call this my 4x4 layout, and click OK. And that suddenly shows up in the Document Preset pop-up menu. And this menu will list all of the different presets that you've created. In this case, there's only one, but you may have presets for a 2x5 and an 8x10 and so on, and you can name them anything you want. You can very quickly get back to those presets later. Let's go ahead and click OK, and we'll see the document show up. I have my 4x4 document with 3 columns and huge margins, and we're good to go. By the way, like I said, we can always go back and change this later. How? Go to the File menu and choose Document Setup. This dialog box is very similar to the New Document dialog box. We get all the same kinds of controls over page size and Bleed and Slug. You'll notice that the margins and columns are not listed here. That's a larger topic that I'm going to be covering in a later movie. Making a new document with the proper settings is the first step in creating a strong foundation for your publication. In the next few movies, I'll cover many other settings you should pay attention to when building your documents. If you have a new document, in this case the document that I started in the last movie, you should always save it to disk. And there are 3 ways to save your documents. They all show up in the File menu. Save, Save As, and Save a Copy. Let me talk about how these are a little bit different. When you have a new untitled document, Save and Save As do exactly the same thing. They open up the Save As dialog box. Here, I can give this file a new name, and then I can decide whether I want it to be an InDesign document or an InDesign template. A template is different from a document because a template, when you open it in InDesign, it always opens up as an untitled document. That means that you can use it as a base for creating other documents. In this case, I'm just going to choose InDesign document, and I can click Save. Save As is great whenever you want to give a document a new name, or if you're going off on a branch and you want to leave your old document alone but start off in a new direction. Save, of course, is if you want to keep working with the same document and you just keep wanting to save over the file on your hard drive. But Save a Copy is a little bit different. If you're working on your document and you want to set off on a new branch, you're not sure if that's the direction you want to go or not, so you might want to save the document in its current state off to your desktop, but keep working with the file that you were working on. That's where Save a Copy comes from. It actually saves a copy of the current state of your document to your hard drive, but it does not actually open that file and start working with it. By the way, there's an ongoing debate about whether you should save to or open files from a server. I personally believe that people should copy files to and from the server onto their local hard drives and then work on them locally. It's just more reliable. However, to be fair, many people do work on files saved directly on their servers with no problems. Ultimately, the choice is yours. One of my favorite things about InDesign is the ability to experiment and never feel like anything I've done is set in stone. You can always go back to where you were. Let me show you an example. I'm going to go to page 4 by going to the Layout menu and choosing Go to Page, or press Command-J on the Mac or Control-J on Windows. I'll just jump to page 4, press OK, and I can start playing around. Let's say, let's make this a little bit smaller, and let's move it over here. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Whoops, I moved that. Well, that's a problem. That's okay, I can always undo. How do I undo? Go to the Edit menu and choose Undo Move Item. So that's one undo. But I can also go ahead and change this by making it bigger, and then maybe I'll move my text down here. I have a lot of control over this and a lot of flexibility, but if I say, that just does not look right, well, at that point I've got 2 options. I can go to the File menu and choose Revert, and that reverts all the way back to the last time I saved the document. Everything I've done since I saved the document will be thrown away. Or I could use Unlimited Undo. You heard me right, there is unlimited undos in InDesign. You can go all the way back, even past the last time you saved the document, all the way back to when you first opened the document to start working on it. You can choose Undo from the Edit menu, or press Command-Z on Mac or Control-Z on Windows. I'll use the keyboard shortcut. Back, and back, and back, and back, all the way back to the last thing I did when I started playing around with this layout. Very powerful. Unlimited undos, it can get you out of all kinds of problems. In an earlier movie, we saw that the New Document dialog box lets you set your document's margins and column guides. But what do you do if you need to change your mind later once the document is already created? Or what if you want different margins in different parts of your document? No problem. That's where the Margins and Columns feature comes in, under the Layout menu. But before you choose this feature, you need to be careful and tell InDesign which pages you want to affect. To choose your target pages, choose the Pages panel. The Pages panel shows you all the pages in your document and gives you little thumbnails. New in cs3, I can scroll through this simply by clicking in the gray area and moving it up. I want to affect pages 6 and 7, this spread, so I'm going to double-click on that to go there. Whatever's selected in the Pages panel is what's going to be affected when I choose Margins and Columns. If I choose just a spread, then just a spread will be affected. If I come up and click on the master page, then just the master page will be affected, and all the pages that are based on that master page. I'll be discussing master pages and how you can use them in a later chapter. In this case, I simply want to choose pages 6 and 7, and I'll go to the Layout menu and choose Margins and Columns. Here's a great trick when using the Margins and Columns dialog box. Turn on the Preview checkbox. I love having these Preview checkboxes turned on because they give you feedback of what you're doing even before you close the dialog box. If I want to change the lower margin, I'll just change this up to maybe 4 picas or something. Or I can use these little buttons, the little up and down arrow buttons. Clicking on that changes by one small increment at a time, and here's a trick. Hold down the Shift key and click on them, and it moves one big increment at a time. Notice because the preview checkbox is turned on, I can actually see the margins change here on the page. I can also change the number of columns that I want, and the amount of space between those columns. When I like the effect, click OK. Notice that this just changes the guides on your page, not the objects on your page. You can still put objects anywhere you want on the page. Guides are just that. They're guides, they're guidelines for where you might put objects. But if you do want InDesign to change both your guides and your page objects at the same time, let's say I want the bottom of this text frame to move up along with the guide, you can do that. You have to use layout adjustment, and that's the topic for the next movie. As we saw in the last movie, you can go to the Layout menu and choose Margin and Columns, and you can change the size of your margins and add and remove columns all day long, but you're still not going to change the objects on your page. But what if you want to affect the text and graphics too? Well, in that case, you need to turn on Layout Adjustment. When you enable Layout Adjustment, you're telling InDesign to watch the margin guides in the columns and change your layout accordingly. Now, if we click OK and change our margins and columns, you'll actually see changes. Let's go see a spread and see how it works. First, I'm going to go to the spread that I want to affect, so I'll go to the Layout menu and choose Go to Page, and I'll type in page 6. Now I want to fit the whole spread in the window, so I'm going to go to the View menu and choose Fit Spread in Window. I want to change this bottom margin, and I also want to change where the text frames end. I want them both to move up. So I went to Layout Adjustment and I turned it on, and now I can go to Margins and Columns and change my bottom margin. But because Layout Adjustment is turned on, now when I change this number, let's say to 1 inch, and I press the Tab key, you'll see that everything changes. Anything that was touching or very, very close to that margin will move with the margin. But any object that's not touching one of the margin guides, like that pull-out quote that's over on the bottom on the right, that does not move with the guide. If I decide that I want more space between the columns, no problem, I just change the gutter space. Let's make it 3 picas instead. And you'll see that the gutters between the columns adjust accordingly, and the text frames change their width too. Layout adjustment relies on the margins and column guides to do its magic, but there's another kind of guide in InDesign as well, the ruler guide, and that's what we're going to cover in the next movie.